Welcome to Virtual Kala Series, a virtual fundraiser to help the families in need during these tough times, in association with Insta Paint Social. So extend your help. Our next artist is Pragya Bhatt, who is going to share some stories, verses, and poems on rain. Let's hear it.
Hello everyone, my name is Pragya Bhatt and I'm performing under the literature category for the Virtual Kala Series. The Virtual Kala Series is doing a great work by raising funds to provide necessities to those in need in collaboration with Insta Paint Social. Please do contribute for our cause as per your wish. And now let us begin with my program. So before we begin, I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about myself. My name is Pragya Bhatt, and I'm an international yoga teacher based in Bangalore. I'm also the author of Beyond Asanas, which is a book which was published by Penguin last year. Before I started teaching yoga full-time, I worked as a software engineer for some of the most eminent companies in the world. But the only thing that I've always really wanted to do was to be a writer. Hence, I wrote the book. Poetry to me is magic. It's a powerful tool through which we can sift through time and space with real and imagined people and events. So for today's session, I've brought together poems from different genres and with different moods, but all related to the title and theme of rain. So I do hope that you guys enjoy the poems that I've selected. So the first poem that I would like to read out is by a writer called Jeet Tail, and he's a Bangalore-based writer. And I actually have had the pleasure of meeting him personally at the Jaipur Lit Fest that I'd once attended with a friend of mine. So Jeet Tail, the book I'm going to be reading out is called These Errors Are Correct. And he's an Indian novelist. A little bit about him. He's an Indian novelist. He's an essayist. He's a poet. And he's a musician. So this book, These Errors Are Correct, actually came with a CD of all the poetry as well. He debuted with a book called Narcopolis in 2012, wherein he draws upon his experiences as a drug addict to sketch a very vivid portrayal of the heroin dens in Mumbai. Narcopolis, which is a book was his debut book and which I have a signed copy of, was shortlisted for the Man Booker Award, and it went on to win the DSC Award for South Asian Literature. And like I said, Jeet Tail resides in Bangalore. So the poem that I want to read out, it's called When It Rains. When it rains, the dead descend. You appear, the smell of rainwater in your hair, wearing the ring I placed on your finger, a scent like heat and a voice not yours. A child's voice singing of age-old danger, in Hindi, a lover's lament from Pyasa. Your lips, clear of the color you wear, are not new to me, are lovely and bare. And our old argument still burns. How soon will you forget me if I die? By the river in this room and the way it returns, I swear, if I forget you, let everything die. When it rains, the dead descend, the dead ascend, they disappear, where we cannot follow into the living air. So he wrote this particular poem for his wife who passed away at a very young age. And I think that's why this poem is sort of depressing. It's actually very depressing. It's very dull. It has a somber mood. And it is a poem which, sort of evokes, the kind of the darkness that was in the author's life at the time. And I wanted to begin with this poem because I really like the way that it sounds when you read it out. And also because I really like Jeet Tail's work, and he's based in Bangalore. And so I have a personal affinity towards him. Now, moving on. The next poem that I want to read out to you is called A Rainy Day by Longfellow. Now, Longfellow is an American writer, and he's also had, because I've wanted to actually bring out a lot of different kinds of writers. I've chosen Longfellow because he was one of the most notable American poets of the 1800s. So this is actually an older poet that we're going to read out. From a young age, he actually knew that he excelled in literature and he wanted to do something in the field of literature. In his adult life, he spent a lot of time in Europe. So if you read a lot of his other works, a lot of his translations, it has a lot of impact. It is also influenced by his time in Europe. And he was a professor there, so that's how he earned a living. He was married twice, and in the later years of his life, he became very reclusive, and he didn't even want to leave his house during that time. So I would like to read a poem called The Rainy Day. The day is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. The vine still clings to the moldering wall, but at every gust the dead leaves fall, and the day is dark and dreary. My life is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. My thoughts still cling to the moldering past, but the hopes of youth fall thick in the blast, and the days are dark and dreary. Be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the clouds is the sun still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall. Some days must be dark and dreary. And although it's a very short poem, I love the fact that it's written in this it's very nice lyrical way, and it's very nice to read out loud as well. And I think a lot of poets suggest that if you really want to make sense of a poem, it helps to read it out loud. And I think for a lot of poetry, that's very true. Now, the reason I really like this poem is because Henry Longfellow, he is actually drawing a parallel, like he's addressing initially the weather outside, and then he's moving on to his internal state. And he's trying to like sort of draw a parallel between what is happening outside in the storms and the darkness, and what's happening in the darkness within him. And I find that this poem is so evocative. It's so descriptive in the long descriptions of the rain, and so it's so much so that you can actually visualize the rain, and you can also visualize how it feels inside when you feel this way, when it's a dreary and dark and gloomy time inside of you. And I really like the last stanza, because until now, the first two stanzas are very dark and dreary and about the rain and how it's raining and it's dull. But in the last stanza, he sort of turns it around and he ends it on a very positive note. And so he's basically telling readers that although everything seems gloomy, the sun still shines behind the clouds, so everything that appears gloomy still has, something positive behind it, which is a lesson that I think we can, really learn from, especially during these times. And I think this poem is also about hope, that there is always hope behind the darkness and the sadness and the gloom. And I really like the last line, into each life some rain must fall, some days must be dark and dreary. So if our lives were always smooth and always nice and always fun, then we wouldn't know what fun is. We wouldn't know what it is like to be carefree. So each life, everyone's life is supposed to have a little bit of gloom, a little bit of darkness, and only then will we be able to appreciate a time when everything is fine and we're actually enjoying ourselves. Okay, so that was about Longfellow and The Rainy Day. Now I would like to move on to another writer that I really like, but this time he is actually from England, Percy Bysshe Shelley. And the poem I would like to read out is called The Cloud. And The Cloud was first published in 1820 as a collection of poems, in a collection of poems. It was called Prometheus Unbound. And also a little bit about Percy Bysshe Shelley. He was an English romantic poet. As it happens with most artists, he did not get a lot of fame when he was alive. But once he died, a lot of people saw that his poetry was worth reading, and it was very notable. Also, during the time he was alive, he was known to be very kind of controversial. He had very progressive views. He had very radical views, and which is why a lot of publishers were not very keen and interested in publishing his poetry and his works. I think that's why when, after he passed away and, the times changed, and people became more open to different ideas, then his poetry really saw, a revival, and, and it was also available because a lot more publishing houses started publishing his work. So it was more available for us to read. He did have a lot of readers during his lifetime. I mean, he was well known, but I think people were a little hesitant about, collaborating with him or really having anything to do with him because of his, image in the eyes of people. He was always known to have a very tumultuous personal life. The interesting thing about him, one of the interesting things about him, is that his wife was Mary Shelley, and she wrote Frankenstein. She was his second wife. And Shelley died at the age of 30, 29 or 30, in a drowning accident from his own boat. So it was like he was always a little, full of surprises. So now, to read his book, his poem called The Cloud. Let me just pull it up here. And this is slightly longer, but again, I really like the way the Romantic poets used to use a lot of imagery and, the play with words. So they used to make even a small phenomena like clouds in the sky seem so magical and mysterious and fun. And so I'd like to read, really take the time to read this, because I think this poem really, has a huge message for everybody, which I'll talk about once I'm done reading. But also, there's nature can be such a great inspirer, for so many people, and that's what we see so well in this, that the beauty of nature is sort of translated into words so magnificently by Percy Bysshe Shelley. So here goes. The Cloud. I bring fresh showers for the thirsting flowers from the seas and the streams. I bear light shade for the leaves when laid in their noonday dreams. From my wings are shaken the dews that waken the sweet buds every one, when rocked to rest on their mother's breast as she dances about the sun. I wield the flail of the lashing hail and whiten the green plains under, and then again as I dissolve it in rain and laugh as I pass in thunder. I sift the snow on the mountains below, and their great pines groan aghast. And all the night 'tis my pillow white, while I sleep in the arms of the blast. Sublime on the towers of my skiey bowers, lightning my pilot sits. In a cavern under is fettered the thunder, it struggles and howls at fits. Over earth and ocean with gentle motion, this pilot is guiding me, lured by the love of the genii that move in the depths of the purple sea. Over the rills and the crags and the hills, over the lakes and the plains, wherever he dream under mountain or stream, the spirit he loves remains. And I all the while bask in heaven's blue smile, whilst he is dissolving in rains. The sanguine sunrise with his meteor eyes and his burning plumes outspread leaps on the back of my sailing rack when the morning star shines dead. As on the jag of a mountain crag, which an earthquake rocks and swings, an eagle alit one moment may sit in the light of its golden wings. And when sunset may breathe from the lit sea beneath, its ardors of rest and of love, and the crimson pall of eve may fall from the depth of heaven above. With the wings folded I rest on mine airy nest, as still as a brooding dove. That orbed maiden with white fire laden, whom mortals call the moon, glides glimmering over my fleece-like floor by the midnight breezes strewn. And wherever the beat of her unseen feet, which only the angels hear, may have broken the woof of my tent's thin roof, the stars peep behind her and peer. And I laugh to see them whirl and flee like a swarm of golden bees. When I widen the rent in my wind-built tent till calm the rivers, lakes, and seas, like strips of the sky fallen through me on high, are each paved with the moon and these. I bind the sun's throne with a burning zone and the moon's with a girdle of pearl. The volcanoes are dim and the stars reel and swim when the whirlwinds my banner unfurl. From cape to cape with a bridge-like shape over a torrent sea, sunbeam proof I hang like a roof, the mountains its columns be. The triumphal arch through which I march with hurricane, fire, and snow, when the powers of the air are chained to my chair, is a million-colored bow. The sphere fire above its soft colors wove, with the moist earth was laughing below. I am the daughter of earth and water and the nursling of the sky. I pass through the pores of the ocean and shores. I change, but I cannot die. For after the rain, when with never a stain, the pavilion of heaven is bare, and the winds and sunbeams with their convex gleams build up the blue dome of air. I silently laugh at my own cenotaph, and out of the cavern of rain, like a child from the womb, like a ghost from the tomb, I arise and unbuild it again. This is something about the last lines of poems that is just so magical for me. Now, this is one of the most remarkable poems that Shelley wrote. And what springs out to me immediately is how he's talking about the cyclical aspect of nature, you know? So he begins by describing the clouds and how they sit above the heavens, how they sit above the mountains, the volcanoes, the clouds, everything. And then he talks about the same clouds sort of, you know, becoming rain. And then in the end, he says, well, you know, once they've become rain and they've passed, then again, you know, they become clouds. And then that's, you know, that's the cycle of nature, and that's the beauty of nature. And so I love the last four lines, which is the lines that I would like to leave you with. He goes, I silently laugh at my own cenotaph. You know, so that, you know, I'm laughing at, you know, what they've written about me. And out of the caverns of rain, like a child from the womb. So it's almost like a rebirth, like a ghost from the tomb. So it's great that he's talking about the womb and tomb, and, you know, sort of saying that it's again, like sort of like reincarnation. It's a rebuilding. I arise and unbuild it again, you know. So I just really like the imagery that he's used, like the womb, tomb, and unbuilding something, and the cenotaph. All of these, you know, have like a negative connotation, except he's taken it very positively. He's said that, you know, it deals with rebirth, renewal, reincarnation, which is again, you know, which just sort of reminds us that that is how nature is. Everything that begins has to end, and everything that ends will eventually start again. So nothing actually ever ends. So for me, this poem is about hope, that even when you think it's the end, it may not be the end. And, you know, you can still sort of laugh and arise again, just like the clouds, you know, arose and unbuilt the entire thing again. So yeah, so that's one of my favorite poems. And although it's long, I really like the the meter in which it's written, and the quality of how, when you read it, there's like a rhythm, and I really enjoy reading it. All right, the next one is a poem that by Robert Frost. And it's actually, it wasn't a full poem. It was more like a quote by him, but I found it very deep, and it's related to the rain. But it's not, as positive as like the last two, poems that I've read. And so before I read it out, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Robert Frost. And most people know him from like another poem that he wrote about making a choice in life. Two roads diverged in front of me. He's written such notable things. He was an American poet. He won 4 Pulitzer Awards, and he was nominated for 31 Nobel Prizes. So he's of some repute and even during his lifetime, he was given a lot of regard for the poetry that he wrote. He was given a lot of recognition for the poetry and the work that he did. He also had a tumultuous personal life. That seems to be like the common thread through all of these writers. They've had like a very tumultuous life, and perhaps that's why they've learned the lessons that they've learned, and that has had an impact on the poetry that they've written, and that's why there's so much to learn from them. He lost his parents when he was very young, and somehow there was some sort of mental illnesses in his family. A lot of his brothers and sisters battled depression. He himself battled depression. If you look at his life, everyone who was close to him had some sort of illness, and some people even succumbed to the illness that they were suffering from. So although he was very successful professionally, in his personal life not so much, and that's always a tragedy. But I think from the greatest tragedy, sometimes we get the greatest works of art. So now this particular poem is called Lodged. The rain to the wind said, "You push and I'll pelt." They so smote the garden bed that the flowers actually knelt and lay lodged, though not dead. I know how the flowers felt. So, so this is very short, as compared to the one by Shelley. And this one is really sad, but I would also like to draw your attention on the empathy aspect of it, that he's saying that, yes, the wind pelted the flowers and the flowers knelt and they lay there lodged, like stuck. Yet the writer knows how they feel, so there's that incredible amount of empathy that comes out in this poem. And I think this empathy is something that Frost may have imbibed, because he was dealing with so many personal issues throughout his own life, with his, with people who were close to him. And it's also, a way of, of the writer telling us that, even if things seem to be very negative, there's also, always a positive way of looking at it, that you can empathize, you can sympathize. And, when I started, I said that poetry helps you sift through time and space, and with people who are real or imagined. And this poem is a perfect illustration of that, because in this poem, the writer is like very, clearly saying that, the wind and rain, they collaborated to cause this pain to the flowers, but I know how the flowers felt. So I really, again, I am a sucker for positivity and poems and prose that always has a positive ending. So I always try to look for a positive ending. But I think in this particular poem, it's so, although the positiveness is not directly in the poetry, but yes, we can derive a positive meaning of empathy for our fellow human beings and people who are different from us, and still live with a lot of compassion. Okay, so the last one, and I hope I'm not really running out of time here, but now the last one is is actually a longer passage, and I really loved that passage. I loved it when I read it for the first time many years ago, and it's from a book called Shantaram by Gregory Davids Roberts. And this is like actually a fun piece because I had so much fun reading it, and the way it's described, it's so vivid, and it's very Hindi filmy in a way. And when I first read it, I thought it was very Hindi filmy. And when I heard that, you know, the subject for this for these sessions will be rain, this was the first passage that came to my mind. Shantaram is probably one of the most famous books about Mumbai. For those of you who haven't read this book, it's basically about the protagonist called Lynn, who is in Mumbai, and he's a convict from Australia. And it basically, you know, takes us through his journey in India, you know, all the ups and downs and his experiences. And also he has a love interest, and her name is Carla. And so in this book, we see that he's really attracted to her, and she's described, Carla is described as this amazingly beautiful woman, and so he's naturally drawn to her. The scene that I'm about to read out is about when they first meet. This is not their first meeting, but this is a meeting when they tell each other, without actually, you know, telling each other that what they feel for each other. So it's a scene which is very evocative, it's passionate, and it's very powerful, you know. And if you're a sucker for Hindi films like I am, you're going to also like really like it. So let me just go to the place. And I actually read this book a long time ago. I borrowed the book from my friend. So I always like sort of have to either download the Kindle versions, or so I'm just gonna come. Yep. Okay. So now now they're meeting each other. Okay, now I finally found it. Okay. Carla stepped forward as if she'd been expecting me. So they're you know, like sort of like this, Lynn gets out of the taxi, and you know, he sees Carla, and it's raining and it's flooding in Bombay. Carla stepped forward as if she'd been expecting me. She accepted my hand and stepped into the punt. I threw the cape around her shoulders as she sat in the center of the boat, and handed her the cap. She slipped it on with a raffish tilt of the cap's peak, and we set off. Vinod sent us in a loop towards the Gateway Monument. As we entered its magnificent vaulted chamber, he began to sing. The monument produced a spectacular acoustic. His love song echoed and rang the bell in every heart that heard him. Vinod brought us to the taxi stand at the Radio Club Hotel. I reached out to help Carla from the boat, but she jumped to the footpath beside me, and we held on to one another for a moment. Her eyes were a darker green beneath the peak of the cap. Her black hair glistened with raindrops. Her breath was sweet with cinnamon and caraway seed. We pulled apart, and I opened the door of a taxi. She handed me the cap and the cape, and took a seat in the back of the cab. She hadn't spoken a single word since I'd arrived with the boat. Then she simply addressed the driver. Mahim, she said. Chalo, Mahim area, let's go. She looked at me once more as the taxi drew away from the curb. There was a command or a demand in her eyes. I couldn't decide what it was. I watched the cab speed away. Vinod and Shantu watched it with me and clapped their hands on my shoulders. We lifted Vinod's boat back onto the roof of the taxi. As I took my seat beside Shantu, reaching out with my left arm to hold the long boat on the roof, I glanced up to see a face in the crowd. It was Rajan, Madame Ju's eunuch servant. He was staring at me. His face was a gargoyle mask of malevolence and hatred. So this is when they actually meet. And what I really like about it is that, you know, there's that command and demand, and there's this like whole you know, the backdrop of the Mumbai rains, and in this scene it's like, you know, there's so much that is unsaid, but in being unsaid, there's so much that he said. And the way he talks about the rains, he talks about the taxi, you know, how, you know, the Bombay taxi cabs, how they're always available, and how, you know, you can just sit in, and it's a very Mumbai you know, scene, and it's something that is so that anyone can relate to. So I really like the way they've actually, you know, put this forth. And I just want to kind of, you know, look through my notes once again, because there was a lot of this, you know, lots of scenes in this book which really, spoke to me. And I think that if you guys have not read, you know, not read Shantaram, it's a great book to read. I think it really captures the mood of Bombay, you know, throughout the seasons. So yeah, so I, you know, so that's about it actually. This was one of the most compelling scenes for me in the book. Now I'd like to read a little bit about Gregory David's Robert for you. Because I think his, you know, the book Shantaram was a very interesting book. It was a very compelling book, and it could not have been written by somebody who did not have a compelling life, or who did not have his own set of, you know, difficulties that he went through, or his own set of experiences. And about this book also, there was a lot of controversy. They say that Gregory David's Roberts based it on his own life, but he's actually gone on record to say that a little bit of it was based on his life, but most of it was like created, that he, you know, he was inspired by reality, but it was not written verbatim as it happened. But I have heard from so many people that he still sits, or you know, he still walks around the Colaba area. He still sits at Leopold's, and you can really have a conversation with him. And you know, it's like the quintessential Bombay, you know, story, like traveler story, that I went to Leopold's, and you know, I spoke to him. He was sitting at the bar, and you know, I spoke to him about the book. And also about Gregory, he actually was a convict, like, you know, much like the character in the book, the protagonist in the book. He was a convict, and he escaped from an Australian prison. And he, you know, while he was in prison, he was trying to write Shantaram, but it you know, the wardens kept destroying it, and he had to keep rewriting it. And maybe that's why we have such a great book, you know, to read now. And he, you know, before he, you know, became a writer, he was actually, he was addicted to heroin. He also had a very tumultuous personal life. He was addicted to heroin. He used to rob banks and, you know, other institutions. And he would do it in a three-piece suit. So he would actually wear a suit, rob the people. He would also, he was famous to say please and thank you, you know, whenever he would rob a bank, and or rob another establishment. And so he's had, you know, quite a colorful life. And Shantaram does have a sequel, so that is on my to read list, and that's something that I think, you know, we can all explore as well. So that's it for me for today. I do hope that you've enjoyed the session. Please do donate generously to our cause. There are so many people at this time who need help, and even a little bit of help from you can actually help them a lot. And also, once again, please don't forget to buy my book. It's called Beyond Asanas. It was published by Penguin last year. In it, I write about asanas and, you know, the stories behind the asanas. And it's available on Amazon and Flipkart. And I think they're running a sale right now, so it's not very expensive also. And yes, I hope you've enjoyed this session. Once again, my name is Pragya, and I will see you again, maybe in a yoga class, maybe in another literature reading. And yes, I hope to meet you soon. Namaste.